Hello, I'm Alfred Weber, and we're with independent scientist Leuren Moret. Today is Sunday, April 17th, 2011, and we're here with an update on the aftermath of the tectonic warfare, the tectonic nuclear war that began with the Fukushima event on March 11th, 2011. If there were a headline for this interview with Leuren, it would be Radiation War Intensifies with HAARP Tornadoes over the United States. Welcome.
Thank you.
Look,
I'm so happy to be on again. I think we do great interviews.
yeah, well, it's kind of right in the middle of this false flag operation and low-level nuclear war against the planet. We're now up to a level 7 of a nuclear disaster, and I wondered if you could tell us more about what's going on in Japan.
Well, basically, TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric and Power Company, has been sort of running the whole emergency response since March 11th. And the government has stepped back, international agencies have stepped back, as we know very well, and they're actually all complicit in this disaster and intensifying the effect of it. The most worrisome thing about this disaster is the danger to all living things. Japan is now already so contaminated in the top third of the main island of Honshu that it's really basically uninhabitable. The radiation levels on the ground are 3 times what they were around Chernobyl. Now, it has been increased to a level 7 nuclear disaster after more than 1 month. I don't know why. It may be international pressure or just the tempo that TEPCO wants to take in order not to panic the citizens of Japan. But it is certainly a level 7 nuclear disaster, which is the highest. It's unprecedented. And there are 50 trillion becquerels of radiation officially admitted to have been released. And this is not a stable situation at all, far from it. It is still a ticking time bomb. And I would like to read the words of Michio Kaku on how he describes this. He said, think of driving a car, and the car all of a sudden lunges out of control. You hit the brakes. The brakes don't work. That's because the earthquake wiped out the safety systems in the first minute after the earthquake, followed by the tsunami an hour later. Then your radiator starts to heat up and explodes. That's the hydrogen gas explosion. And then to make it worse, the gas tank is heating up, and all of a sudden your whole car is going to be in flames. That's a full-scale meltdown. And Alfred, it has now been reported that the spent fuel rods that are full of fission products, basically what is produced in a nuclear bomb explosion, and they have reached 5,000 degrees centigrade. That is the temperature of the sun. And so that's what Michio Kaku is referring to about it's a full-scale meltdown. And so he goes on. So what do? You drive the car into a river. That's what the utility company did by putting seawater into the reactors. Seawater from the Pacific Ocean in a desperate attempt to keep water on top of the core. But then seawater has salt in it, and that gums up your radiator. And so what do? You call out the local firemen. And so now you have these Japanese samurai warriors. They know that this is potentially a suicide mission. They're coming in with hose water. Hose water. This is what you sprinkle flowers with in your garden, Alfred. Trying to keep water over the melted nuclear reactor cores. So that's the situation now. So when the utility says that things are stable, it's only stable in the sense that you're dangling from a cliff hanging by your fingernails. And as the time goes by, each fingernail starts to crack. That's the situation now. And it's still very, very dangerous. It is still very unpredictable. And all 6 reactors have melted down.
Now, does that mean that all of the radiation that could be released has been released into the atmosphere, or could it even get worse?
Oh, far from it. They are still releasing radiation into the atmosphere, and TEPCO had a press conference today, and the president of TEPCO admitted that it may take 9 more months to contain those reactors and to put cement over them or whatever they're going to do. Now, that is just not soon enough. They should have done it right after the earthquake, because within 24 hours, no, within 90 minutes after the earthquake, the reactors were already in meltdown. As soon as the cooling pump stopped, 90 minutes later, those reactors are in full meltdown.
Now, just to get a kind of a fix on the facts here, when compared to Chernobyl, where we now know there have been 1 million deaths, how does this now compare to Chernobyl?
Well, there are 2 aspects to it. Chernobyl had a graphite core, and it also had uranium fuel rods. Units 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 have uranium fuel rods in those reactors. But in September, covertly, TEPCO put MOX, or mixed plutonium and uranium fuel, into Unit 3. MOX fuel was forbidden by the governor of the Fukushima prefecture. And governors of prefectures in Japan have power higher to make decisions in their own prefecture than the government. So it violated his ban on MOX fuel in Fukushima prefecture. The most violent explosion was in Unit 3 because plutonium fuel is extremely, extremely dangerous. It's much hotter than uranium because it has a shorter half-life, and it is an extremely pernicious or dangerous poison. The difference between Chernobyl and Fukushima is very, very great. In the first place, the Chernobyl reactor was much smaller than any of the reactors at Fukushima. The second difference is that the rods melted down and burned at Chernobyl, and that was for a prolonged period of time. But it was only uranium in the rods and some fission products that are created once the reactor starts operating. The uranium atoms release particles and rays from the nucleus and fragment the uranium atom into pieces that are actually other radioactive isotopes. So that is what was released from Chernobyl. What we're looking at Fukushima is not only a meltdown in 6 reactors that are the biggest ones in the world, and much, much more fuel are in those reactors, so they've all gone into a complete meltdown. Some of that has been released into the atmosphere, and And now they're dumping the radioactive cooling water into the ocean, which means that we'll get into the Great Conveyor Belt, which will carry it all around the Pacific and the Atlantic. That's very, very dangerous. It will poison the fisheries. It's going to kill whales. It will poison food supplies all around the world that come out of the ocean. And along with the atmospheric contamination that is raining out over continents, a major contamination of our food supplies globally is happening. Now, the worst thing about Fukushima is that 600,000 nuclear spent fuel rods were stored in 7 pools. 6 of the cooling pools were located on top of the reactors. In the 3 nuclear power plants, reactors that blew up, those buildings also expelled a lot of the fuel rods straight into the atmosphere. They went 300 feet or more up into the air. We don't even know where they are now or what happened to them. But according to Dr. Busby, the spent fuel rods in all 3 reactors were blown into the sky. And the Unit 3 had the most explosive reaction when the hydrogen exploded because of the MOX fuel. So we now have not just the radiation that was released by Chernobyl, but we have much, much, much more dangerous radiation, the fission products, released from the spent fuel rods, and that did not happen at Chernobyl. So now they're detecting plutonium in Scandinavia, in England, in Australia. It's all over the world now.
So, just to ask you, because people are trying to get information, individuals who sit down in the middle of Tokyo and will say, I have my private Geiger counter here, and there's nothing on here, and say that the radiation is a psyops, that there is no radiation, are promoting a public disservice and are promoting false information. Is that correct?
It's absolutely false information, and the Japanese government must have a very different Geiger counter, because the decision has been made to move the Japanese government and the parliament out of Tokyo to either Nagoya or Osaka.
Okay, Leuren, I'm not sure what happens, but occasionally the light goes off of you and your screen becomes dark. I'm not sure.
This is interference by intelligence operatives, and
okay,
there's
fine.
nothing I can do about it.
Okay, I just wanted to
yes
to check that. Well, you've been saying that we're now have a level 7 nuclear disaster, that it's a ticking time bomb, that the Japanese government is moving the capital to Nagoya or Osaka, that Osaka...
And the emperor has moved with his court and his family to Kyoto.
Aha. Now, what are all the significances of the Japanese government moving to Osaka, if that happens, and the emperor moving to Kyoto?
Well, Kyoto was the location of the imperial court and the emperor for almost 1,000 years, a very, very long time. And Edo, or the modern name is Tokyo, was the stronghold of the shogun. Now, the shogun means, sho means the lord, and gun means the general. And this is basically the structure even today of the military in relation to the rulers or the people in control of governments and countries and regions. So it's always the ruling elite stand on two legs. They stand on the military, that's one leg, and they stand on organized crime, that's the other leg. And they could never stay in power, they could never remain in power without that force behind them to control and subdue the people and to subject people to complete subservience and just a surrender of their lives to the ruling elite. And that is what is happening now. We are rolling very rapidly into global fascism. The Osaka now, although Kyoto is the traditional stronghold of the imperial court, Osaka has been the stronghold of the Rothschilds since the 1700s. And the reason the Rothschilds chose Osaka is because it's halfway between the imperial court in Kyoto and the shogun in Tokyo or Edo at that time. So also what's very interesting is that the fourth generation nuclear weapons program that Japan secretly has is located at Osaka University. And the HAARP facility, which not only the United States, Britain, Russia have, but also we now know that Japan has one that is operated out of Kyoto University. So it may be that the Rothschilds have the nuclear weapons and the imperial household has, or that the emperor has the HAARP facility, or they may be shared. I'm not sure. But I think for sure that the location is significant.
Right. Now, you've been talking about TEPCO being taken over by the government there, the power company.
Yes. Now, there's a lot of talk this week about TEPCO and the fate of TEPCO. Now, TEPCO has been charging ahead, and they've sent in robots today into the facility, or maybe over the past couple of days, and the robots are going into the destroyed reactor buildings and taking radiation levels and temperature, and they have cameras on them. So they're kind of like a caterpillar. They're on treads, and I'm not sure how much they'll be able to move around or maneuver. They may be able to do that because drone photos from a helicopter within the last day or two have shown that the inside of the buildings are just really very badly destroyed. There's just detritus and building materials and ruptured pipes and wires all over the place. I don't know how they can even get into the buildings, but they probably will.
Now,
that means that that TEPCO is either probably going to be taken over by the government, or it could be bankrupted, or it could be dismantled, and a new energy grid or energy corporations could be taking over. It's unclear at this point, but apparently the press conference today with the TEPCO president announcing that they're going to cover these reactors within the next 9 months and clean up the site is the first really positive move that I've really heard, although I don't really trust them or believe them.
now,
Actually, the whole Fukushima site, the whole plant facility, the entire thing should be covered in cement to prevent further escape of radiation. The whole site, the soil, everything, the foliage, the trees, the buildings, it's all contaminated.
And the releases of radiation are contaminating not only Japan, but also the northern and southern hemispheres now.
Yes, yes. So not only is the northern third of Honshu, the main island of Japan where Tokyo is located, not only is that contaminated at levels 3 times that around Chernobyl, but even the port of Tokyo is now so radioactive and contaminated with Fukushima radiation that ships are refusing to go into port there to unload their cargoes. They're probably going to ports in parts of Japan that are more to the south. But also the radiation has now been reported in Taiwan, very, very, very large concentrations. It was in Colombia, reported in Colombia, South America, probably a week ago, and now it's being reported in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia and New Zealand and places like that. So in 1 year, because of atmospheric convection and mixing, there will be complete mixing of this radiation all over the planet. Just like bomb testing, just like with the nuclear power plants. It's just, there's nowhere to hide, Alfred. There's nowhere to go. It's going to be everywhere.
And at what level or at what strength do you estimate that radiation attributable to the Fukushima event to be?
Well, it's going to be like bomb testing, but much worse and much faster, because with bomb testing, the nuclear bomb tests that France and Britain and the United States and the Soviet Union did, they injected those very deadly fission products from the nuclear explosion, which is basically what's in the spent fuel rods, high into the atmosphere. And 85% of it is still up there. It allowed the very short half-life, very dangerous radioactive isotopes, and there are more than 1,300 produced in a fission process. But the short half-life ones, injected high into the atmosphere, were able to decay without being rained out into our environment and increasing the exposure and the health effects by many, many times. What is happening now is this is floating up into the lower troposphere. In fact, it's been reported up to 10 kilometers, and that is the most dynamic part of the entire atmosphere. It's where all the storms and snow and rain and tornadoes rain out. Almost all, 95% of the radiation escaping from Fukushima will be rained out in 2.5 months. Now, another problem is that if they don't fix it for 9 months, if they don't encase all of those disastrous reactors that are still in full meltdown and proceeding to higher and higher temperatures, which causes more and more radiation to be released, then not only are you raining out what has been released up to now in 2.5 months, but you're continuing to release more, exposing the whole global population to basically what will be low levels of radiation. And chronic exposure to low-level radiation is the worst form of nuclear war. It will have the greatest effects in a very negative sense on all living things. It's not just humans.
Well, just to kind of get grappling on this again at the Japan level, in our last update, we heard from Dr. Chris Busby, who said that the northern third of Japan should be evacuated. But now we're hearing from the Prime Minister of Japan, who says, no, everything is normal, and we all should go around about, everyone in Japan should go about leading their normal lives and eating food from the areas around the power plants. What is that exactly is going on here?
Well, apparently the Japanese citizens don't believe him or his party. They're angry at them, and they just had local elections, and Prime Minister Nato Kan and his party lost 70 seats or 80 seats. So I don't think the Japanese people are in favor of his advice, but I'd like to read about his latest statement. Speaking at a news conference to mark 1 month since the massive earthquake and tsunami devastated the northeastern coast of the country, Japanese Prime Minister Kan said produce from the region around the Fukushima plant is safe to eat despite radiation leaks. And what he's talking about is soil that has been tested for radiation levels, and they've reported that the radiation contamination is 3 times higher than around the Chernobyl disaster. So he's out of his mind. And this is his exact words, translated from Japanese. He said, quote, "From now on, people should not fall into an extreme self-restraint mood, and they should live life as normal. To consume products from the areas that have been affected is also a way in which to support the area. We should enjoy the use of such products and support the areas that have been affected. I ask you to do this." And he also announced that they're going to allow people to return to highly contaminated areas where no one should be living.
Well, he exactly. Here we have Dr. Chris Busby saying that the northern third of Japan should be evacuated, and that there are going to be 400,000 cases of cancer as is. And now we have the Prime Minister of Japan urging people to move back into the area and consume food that is subject to radiation. Isn't he advocating genocide?
Yeah, he's telling people to commit suicide, and he's carrying out genocide with a smile on his face. Be patriotic and eat that food and drink that contaminated water and those contaminated fish to support your country.
Now,
it's suicide and genocide.
Now, where is he coming from? What's his mindset, and what's the mindset of the bureaucracy that is pushing him to do this?
Well, first of all, after World War II was over, the Japanese people wanted a democratic form of government so badly. They really had all of the hope in the world that they would finally become a democratic country. But what happened is General MacArthur and CIA Colonel, I've forgotten his name, they set up the post-World War II government by taking the gold treasure and other things. Colonel Lonsdale was his name. That MacArthur and Lonsdale captured a lot of the gold and other treasure that the Japanese looted from 12 Southeast Asian countries, China, Manchuria, and then, of course, Korea, too. And can you imagine how much gold and money that was, Alfred? It's 5,000 years of accumulated wealth that had never been touched. In fact, it was more gold in Asia than the London bankers even expected. They had no idea Asia had that much gold in their possession. And so that money was put into 2 trust funds. One, and this was with President Truman too. One trust fund was trillions of dollars, and it's described in a book called The Gold Warriors by the Seagraves, Seagraves, and it's what happened to Yamashita's gold. And that money was set up in a fund to bankroll the war criminals in Japan from World War II. And these are multi-generational war criminals, just like we have in the West, who had looted all those countries and run prostitution and drug rings, and they had used human soldiers, prisoners of war, to do biological and other mind control experiments on them in Manchuria. So MacArthur and Lonsdale gave all that money to those war criminals from World War II to set up the political parties in Japan, the parliament, and the government. And so those are the people in charge now. And since they're multi-generational war criminals, why would we expect them to change their spots? Leopards don't change their spots. So basically, the war machine, the war criminal machine, is still running Japan.
Right.
And on top of that, the nuclear power industry, this is General Electric and Westinghouse, which are secretly owned by the Rockefellers, they 85% of the commercial reactors around the world are made by GE and Westinghouse designs. And they also provide the nuclear fuel at a guaranteed price so that countries can buy nuclear power and be sure of the actual cost of the nuclear fuel, rather than having it jacked up and down like with gasoline today. So the nuclear power industry in the U.S. actually contributes more money to the election fund of the President of the United States. So nuclear power elected Obama and every other president before him since the advent of nuclear power. And the money donated by the nuclear power industry, which is basically bribes and fraud, is actually selects the Prime Minister of Japan, or determines.
Sure. Now listen, we're about halfway through this this segment, and while we're still on Japan, you've noted that there appears to be a new formula for global depopulation and global nuclear war against the population and against the ecology, and that appears to be nuclear power plants plus earthquake faults and HAARP tectonic warfare, plus the Stuxnet virus. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about the Stuxnet virus.
The Stuxnet virus is one of the most dangerous aspects of this Fukushima disaster. And not only are nuclear power plants in the U.S. and Japan placed on active earthquake fault zones, but this Stuxnet virus was created and emerged in 2010. It was created by the CIA and the Mossad. And a German cyber investigator named Ralph Langner has a very excellent talk. It's a 10-minute presentation at a conference in Long Beach in March. I believe it was March 1st. And what he said about the Stuxnet virus, because he was hired by Siemens, the company that made the controllers for many General Electric, many power plants, not just nuclear power plants, and not just GE reactors. He said that in his presentation that the Stuxnet virus is non-generic. In other words, it can attack any system with controllers. For instance, in an auto assembly plant, in power plants, in planes, in ships, anything that is partly computerized or the control system is computerized can be attacked with this non-generic virus. And what the virus does is it is inserted in a USB stick, or with a if an inspector is coming into a power plant or a factory or whatever with a laptop to go over the computer system, it can be inserted from his laptop. But we know that in the Boucher disaster, which was about 6 months ago, that's the first time the Stuxnet virus was used, and it was also intended for Natanz in Iran. One is a nuclear power plant, and the other one is a nuclear fuel enrichment plant. And what they did was they put it into the Boucher facility, where they are enriching uranium in very, very, very special centrifuges. And what happened is it made all of the dials in the control room and the operating system look completely normal, but it then went into the actual centrifuge room, and it sped the rotors up in the centrifuges, and they blew up. They just flew apart. They were revved up too high, and so oh God, hundreds of centrifuges were destroyed. Now that virus, the Stuxnet virus, appeared sometime after June or in July of 2010, less than a year ago. The MOX fuel was covertly put into Unit 3 at Fukushima in September. 63 computers in Japan were discovered with the Stuxnet virus in October of 2010. And an Israeli security team had just finished installing a new security system in Fukushima in about February of 2010. So there we have the dirty trail and the obvious players, or the suspected players. But this all could have been avoided if they had stayed with a separate operating system, which was analog and was not a part of the regular Microsoft computer system. And that was a hands-on contact with all of the dials and the controls and everything, so that this sort of thing could not happen. But gradually, as we've seen so many times, the whole system became computerized, and the hands-on control was eliminated, and that's how the Stuxnet virus operates. It just takes over.
Right. So the U.S., of course, is a prime target for HAARP tectonic nuclear attacks. And what is an update?
Well, let me just talk about the targets. The biggest targets for the Stuxnet virus, according to Ralph Langner, are the U.S., Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Turkey. And think about it. Most of those are NATO countries. I think they're all NATO countries except Japan. So those are target-rich environments for delivery with a pen drive or a USB stick, or they can also use conventional worm technology, which I mentioned as just going through a laptop computer into the operating system. Now, Langner was not CIA. He was hired by Siemens to analyze the vulnerability, and he used their labs. He couldn't say that in this 10-minute presentation for the TED conference, but that was what he was doing. And then he was directly approached by Richard Clarke, who was an advisor to 3 U.S. Presidents, to bring him in to rein in Ralph Langer so that he wouldn't do more damage to the plan. It's a U.S. plan. The U.S. did Fukushima from start to finish. And as Ralph Langer has mentioned Japan on the TED broadcast, he sort of gave it away. But Siemens was going crazy to get to the answer to their controller problem, and this guy used their labs to figure it out, because the Stuxnet virus attacks the Siemens controllers that are in these power plants. And he was directly on the mark, and that's why the CIA has gone after him, to avoid more such broadcasts. But you see, if we pay attention, and if we watch, and if we know what the right questions are, we can tease this information out. It's all there on the front page. It's just compartmentalized, and you don't notice also if you are not aware of what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. So he was directly on the mark, and that's why the CIA has gone after him, to avoid more such broadcasts, and therefore that's why Richard Clarke stepped in and hired him. And then the woman who sent this to me, she said, I know enough about these PLCs, those are what the controllers are called, to recognize that Ralph was right on. He's a high-level security consultant out to have the highest clientele possible, and he broke the code. Kudos to his team. He's what made the solution known to the whole world. So there's a high-level American advisor to president stepping in to shut him up, and he can't knock him off. He's too well known. So he just promotes him. He just gives him another job. Now, the Stuxnet virus is extremely dangerous and very, very worrisome. And during the Cold War, the U.S. was doing cyber warfare with the Soviet Union. And what they found out is that the Soviet Union planned to steal certain technology from the U.S., and so what the U.S. did was they sabotaged the technology and allowed the Soviets, made sure they stole the sabotage technology. This is very much like a Stuxnet virus. And pretty soon, by the mid-1980s, the Soviets didn't even know which computers were good and which ones were infected throughout the whole Soviet Union. They had stolen all this technology that was sabotaged and proliferated it all over the Soviet Union, and it sabotaged natural gas pipelines. It helped actually to take down the Soviet Union in the Cold War. So perhaps that is the fate of North America and of the Western countries, because it sure looks to me like the Stuxnet virus and nuclear power plants, which are almost all in major superpowers, and a lot of them are built on faults. So it just looks like a new formula for cyber tectonic nuclear warfare.
Now, who is behind this? I know that we talked about it last time, but let's go through it again.
This is part of HAARP, HAARP, and it's a huge weapon of mass destruction that was developed jointly by the Soviet Union and the U.S. during the Cold War. Star Wars and National Missile Defense, the funds and grants and money from those programs were actually funneled into the development of HAARP. I am a Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab whistleblower. Livermore and Los Alamos are the two main nuclear weapons laboratories for the U.S. And the backbone of the internet was made at Livermore. Now, Ralph Langler said that it had to be extremely sophisticated computer knowledge in order to create the Stuxnet virus. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was not made at Livermore Lab. That would be a good guess, since the backbone of the internet was made there. It could be even the Navy who made it, because the Navy controls the whole internet, and SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation, set up all of the internet and communications for the entire military around the world. And that was when Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who we already know is a top spook in the United States, was CEO of SAIC. And John Poindexter, Admiral Poindexter, five-felon Admiral Poindexter, was also at SAIC, and he wrote the security software for the Sequoia and other election voting machines. So it could have even been Admiral Poindexter who wrote it. It was someone who knew everything about everything, and it was probably a team, actually.
Right. We have about 15 minutes left in the segment, and so what I'd like to do is to shift now and begin to bring an update as to what's occurring in North America, because I know that very recently we had HAARP weather modification with tornadoes in Arkansas, in various parts of the U.S.
Arizona, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, all up and down the coast of North America.
Right. And how do these relate to the ongoing radiation war with the radiation coming out of Fukushima?
Well, even in 1947, it was published in newspapers in the United States that the most efficient form of nuclear war was to explode a nuclear bomb, in rain clouds. So basically, they have done that with Fukushima. They allowed the buildings to blow up. All they had to do was drill holes in the top of those buildings to let the hydrogen leak out, and there never would have been a single explosion. And they knew that from 3 Mile Island. They know when you start pumping salt water or fresh water into reactors where they're already melted down, and that means that the melted fuel comes in contact with the water, and it dissociates the hydrogen from the oxygen in the water molecule. So you get free oxygen and free hydrogen floating around and collecting under the roof of the reactor building. And pretty soon, sooner or later, that's going to come in contact with the hot fuel rods, the spent fuel rods that were in pools that had leaked, or some other source of heat, and it ignites the hydrogen. And as we saw 4 times, we saw huge explosions that just blew the top of the buildings off. And I sent you some links today to photographs, close-ups, very high-resolution photos taken today or yesterday by drone helicopters that have been flying over the Fukushima plant and assessing what damage has occurred. And when you see those pictures, you know they can never operate those plants again. They cannot even effectively pump water through them. All the pipes are blown up, and the building, the whole infrastructure is a disaster. And there's pieces of building all over inside and outside of each of those reactor buildings. What I did see in plant number 4, reactor number 4, I could see steam coming up out of where the pools are, the cooling pools for the spent fuel rods. So I believe that there is water in some of the pools in that building. I only saw 2 columns of steam. So perhaps there are only 2 cooling ponds out of 4 that have water in them. But in the other buildings, 3 and 1 and 2, I didn't see any steam coming out of them at all. So that indicates that the fuel rods were blown into the sky, or there's no water in the cooling ponds. They must have cracked in the earthquake too. Some of them must have. So it's a very, very dire situation. And all of that radiation is coming over here. I know that San Francisco drinking water was reported last week to have iodine 131 levels 18,000 times higher than the EPA standard. Now, what's happening in the US and Canada and Japan is that the regulatory agencies or the governments are increasing the amount of exposure to these very dangerous radioactive isotopes. They're increasing it and making it legal to expose the population to much higher levels of radiation. And isn't that what they always do? They just move the goalposts. So there was also a video on the internet of water officials in Santa Clara. They were suited up in the highest levels of protection, and they were sampling drinking water in Santa Clara County last week, and they chased away the citizens who had video cameras and made them leave the area. Now, Santa Clara and Sonoma counties, as I mentioned before, the public health departments issued letters to doctors in both of those counties ordering them to not give patients concerned about radiation exposure any iodine tablets, but to tell them the levels were harmless. Well, they aren't harmless for pregnant women. They are not harmless for developing fetuses. They're not harmless for the elderly, and they're not harmless for any age in between. So it's just the governments are complicit in this whole nightmare, and the EPA has 124 radiation monitoring stations, but 37 now are broken. And when I looked at the reported levels of radiation that the EPA is reporting before and after the Fukushima disaster, the radiation levels are lower in many cities after the Fukushima disaster than before. So that is just absolutely Orwellian nonsense. How can you have lower radiation when it's being measured, the iodine 131, like after Chernobyl, it's being measured in the milk and the food and dairy products and drinking water and even in the atmosphere.
Right. Now, let's look a bit at the future, because that's when these cancers begin to mature, and you've made some predictions about the 20-year impact of this event.
Yes, what's going to happen is that if you look at China now and the increase in obesity, diabetes, hypertension, all of the problems that they're having, health problems in China now, because of the uranium that we've been using in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia since 1990, it's caused obesity in 250 million Chinese just in 20 years. In fact, there was an article very recently in a Chinese paper reporting with many photos on a 4-year-old little boy in China who already weighs 125 pounds. He is so obese. Now, the Chinese couldn't have changed their diet and their lifestyles so quickly in a 20-year period to cause such huge increases all over the country in obesity. And I also have looked at infertility all over the world. I use CIA data. They have very good demographics. And wherever the monsoon has been raining out the uranium into the drinking water and the environment, and that's in parts of Africa, the southern part of Africa, the east coast of Africa, and then across the bottom of that bulge of Africa, Nigeria, and those countries. They have large increases in conjoined twins or Siamese twins. They have increases in diabetes and other radiation-related illnesses. Also in Sumatra and Southeast Asia, where they have very high rainfall. And then all across China and Mongolia, it's called the esophageal cancer belt. It's the Silk Road esophageal cancer belt. That is a pathway cancer in the esophagus, the lungs, the intestines, and the rectum. So this is going to happen. In 20 years, North America will be like that. We'll have an epidemic of obesity, of very, very heavy children, unhealthy children, diabetes in babies, babies born with cancer, and even Farrah Fawcett, who died of rectal cancer this year. Very, very sad thing that happened to her. She was born during the bomb testing era, and she was actually born with cancer in her intestines. So I am sure her rectal cancer was caused by the pre-birth exposure that she experienced before even coming into this world as a living baby.
Yeah, and just in the last 4 minutes of this program, I really want to concentrate again on the parties that are behind this, that control the nuclear power plant industry, that control HAARP, and that are carrying out events like Fukushima as intentional tectonic nuclear warfare events for purposes of depopulating the human race and the human genome in a very painful way.
Well, first of all, weapons of mass destruction, and certainly the nuclear weapons project called the Manhattan Project, was a deliberate attempt to develop weapons of mass destruction with a depopulation aspect. HAARP is a weapon of mass destruction. There are other weapons of mass destruction. There are bioweapons and chemical weapons and radioactive weapons. Those are all weapons of mass destruction that are developed by the military and by universities and by nuclear weapons labs for the bankers. And the bankers are the London bankers. The public name or the public face are the Rothschilds, but they're just a public face for many, many, many people. We don't even know who they are, but they are multi-generational crime families, permanent war crimes families. And they go back even to the Roman Empire and before, to the Egyptian era. So these are the hidden bankers and their interests, but it's basically the London bankers and the Wall Street bankers. Now, the Rockefellers were able to steal the Tesla technology for Dr. Tesla when he died in the 1930s. And basically, HAARP is Tesla technology. The weather modification is Tesla technology, and it's actually manipulating the energy and the electricity in the environment. It's weaponizing natural systems so that they can be artificially triggered to release huge amounts of energy that build up in nature along fault lines or in volcanoes or in rain clouds. It doesn't matter. It's tremendous amounts of energy. And what they've done is just to weaponize the natural world around us, and now they're using it to destroy humanity.
Right. Well, we've come to the end of another update. In this last minute, I know that I've changed my way of approaching the natural world since Fukushima. I now take chlorophyll tablets, chlorella every day, drink miso soup, eat seaweed, and I'm just constantly aware of the fact that I live in a radiated environment and really have to deal with that. In this last minute, what parting thoughts would you like to leave for our audience?
Well, I would just like to say that we know that the Rockefeller Zone, General Electric, and Westinghouse, they've been involved in promoting nuclear power. They stole the Tesla technology when he was probably murdered in his hotel room. But what I would like to say is that no region understands energy better than Asia, and the solution will come from Asian traditional medicine, from the martial arts. Tai Chi is something that is a fantastic way to boost your immune system. Radiation attacks the immune system. We all have cancer in us, but it's our immune system that keeps it in check. So there will be alternative ways to deal with this disaster. People will survive. A lot of people are going to be hurt, but every disaster is also an opportunity. So I hope that people will think of it that way and begin to look for their own solutions and to take better care of their own bodies and their health, and to take charge of their own health, because we don't need the kind of outside help we're getting in the United States.
Thank you, Leuren.
We can take care of our own health and share the solutions with each other. Thank you so much, Alfred, for another wonderful interview. You're so inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.